This is the first in a series of training videos designed to complement the UK 120 Reading Applications class. In this first video, I will provide an overview of course components, followed by a profile of a struggling reader. The bulk of this video will be an historical overview of reading comprehension theories and theories of learning. Here are some sources that will help us along the way. Adolescent reading programs, or classes, need to take into account the following elements: student choice, strategic reading, social processes, critical literacy, and multiple literacies or multimodal communication. Student choice means that when possible, students should have some say in what they read and/or in how they communicate comprehension of their reading. Students need to practice making such choices if they are going to be able to read and study independently in a college setting. Programs also need to focus on strategic reading, meaning that students need to know what to do when they encounter difficult text. They need to be able to draw on strategies to help them reach a meaningful level of comprehension, despite what Almasi and Fullerton refer to as clunks along the way. Students should come to expect challenges, or clunks, as all good readers do. What's most important is for students to possess the strategic knowledge to help them deal with both clicks and clunks when they encounter them. Reading is ultimately a social process, and this needs to be encouraged and developed with adolescent readers. They need opportunities to share their processes of reading and discuss text in an open, well-scaffolded instructional setting. Adolescents also need to learn how to be critically literate by effectively questioning the text and the context that surrounds it. Readers should know how to read with a discerning eye and ask, where is this information coming from? Is it reliable? And what is the purpose of this information? Finally, we need to acknowledge the multimodal nature of communication when working with adolescents. They read, write, and understand the world through multiple lenses or modes, and we need to acknowledge and develop multiple literacy skills, which include reading, writing, speaking, listening, gesturing, and technology use in a variety of environments. This can result in information overload for some students. So then, what does it mean to struggle? According to Pam Mueller's study, struggling readers encounter a number of roadblocks through years of schooling and learning to read. Struggles may include grappling with big words, big books, reading aloud, and accelerated expectations. When students feel a sense of struggle, they may compensate for feelings of frustration by implementing coping strategies such as fake reading or acting out. Teachers often respond to such frustration by labeling the student as deficient and providing easier or less work. Some instruction is ineffective with any student, but especially with a struggling reader, and that is instruction that doesn't teach. We need to anchor ourselves in the idea that we teach students, not books. Instruction should not resemble a one-size-fits-all mentality, because students are individuals, and they need to participate in the learning process, bringing their individual qualities with them as assets. Teachers must do more than monitor student behavior while the students tend to tasks independently. Mueller classifies these classrooms as cultures where the instructional emphasis is on telling rather than teaching, and this is not our desired goal. Our course aims to create an environment where students feel welcome and experience a strong sense of community, but in order to accomplish such a goal, it's important to address the disconnect between research and practice that can occur in classrooms. In an attempt to bridge this gap, we will dive into the world of theory. Many of these theories may be familiar to you from other disciplines. However, we will look at them through the lens of reading comprehension. There are two worlds that collide in education: the world of testing and data collection that finds its roots in positivism, and the world of instruction that is more directly rooted in pragmatism. Many of the reading theories that we will explore may seem to fit under one of these two umbrellas. However, it is not our purpose to categorize and oversimplify theoretical origins. Auguste Comte, an early positivist, believed that knowledge exists and can be uncovered through the use of the scientific method, whereby we observe, hypothesize, test, and record data, which means predict and experiment, and conclude, meaning evaluate. The process can then be repeated, thus coming closer to truth. This approach is relevant in the way that we collect data, test students for proficiency, conduct some research, run scientific labs, and determine program placement. Charles Peirce is credited with being the founder of American pragmatism and the co-founder of semiotics. Although not a positivist, Peirce admired positivism's strength in the scientific method and acknowledged its weakness when it comes to religion. Peirce believed that community becomes the authority and that the social nature of people effectively causes internal human struggle as one reconciles individual belief with community belief. How a community comes to agreement based on the lens they look through, in effect, influences what is believed to be true. Peirce still viewed the scientific method as a lens through which to seek truth. William James arrived on the scene 20 years after Peirce with his update to pragmatism. James focused more on individual observation and experience as a way to seek truth. But he held that ideas could be revised and improved upon, meaning that truth was relative in many ways, rather than absolute. James believed in apperception, the process of acquiring new knowledge by experiencing new things, and revising our stock of ideas to form new conceptions and/or revise old ones. In terms of education, James believed that teachers must address the needs of the child before them, be perceptive, conscious, and ingenious, characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors that cannot be learned from psychology. Pragmatism is relevant to current educational practice in the way that we attempt to create strong communities, adhere to individual differences, and reflect on success or failure by revising processes and seeking a revised version of truth. Many of the reading theories that we go on to explore may ring of positivist or pragmatic schools of thought. But as David Pearson points out, to assign time frames to movements in reading comprehension necessarily oversimplifies both their origins and their legacies. This oversimplification serves as a way for us to understand trends and the overall evolution of comprehension instruction. However, please don't think of every theory as existing during only one time period. Often, theories are like a conversation, and as one responds to another, either with some agreement and revision, or with a completely different outlook, the conversation can shift and become subject to interpretation and reinterpretation over time. We will look at several groups of theories, including early roots of reading, behaviorism, constructivism in reading, theories of literacy development, social learning perspectives, cognitive processing perspectives, and construction integration models. Early roots of reading. We will look at 4 theories: mental discipline theory, associationism, unfoldment, and structuralism. Mental discipline theory was coined by Plato and Aristotle. It holds that the brain is a muscle that needs to be strengthened and worked out, if you will, in order to function at an optimal level. For readers, the emphasis here would be on practice. Associationism also dates back to Aristotle and speculates about 3 kinds of connections that would aid memory and learning. Contiguity, things that occur together in time tend to become associated. Similarity, things that are similar tend to become associated. And contrast, things that are opposite tend to become associated. For readers, the emphasis here would be on connections that are made before, during, and after reading. The unfoldment theory, fostered by Rousseau, Pestalozzi, and Froebel in the mid-1700s to early 1800s, emphasized the central role of curiosity in learning. For readers, the emphasis here would be on motivation and engagement. Structuralism dates back to the late 1800s and early 1900s and sought to explain learning through the study of perceptual processes. For readers, The emphasis would be on the processes necessary to perceive print. A modern application of this theory would be to use text-to-speech technology to assist a child that could not correctly perceive print text. Behaviorism is a theoretical perspective of learning that focuses on observable changes in behavior. The outcome of learning should be changed behavior. For readers, the emphasis here would be on observable reading behaviors. There are three major theories that we will look at: classical conditioning, connectionism, and operant conditioning theory. Classical conditioning suggests that learning occurs through the process of association. If we associate a bell with receiving food, as with Pavlov's dogs, then we will salivate when we hear the bell. We associate the two things together. For a reader, the emphasis might be on success or failure that is associated with reading or with school. Edward Thorndike extended the study of behaviorism by going beyond events that preceded actions, as with Pavlov's dogs, to demonstrating that stimuli that occurred after a behavior also had an influence on future behaviors. The causal nature of Thorndike's analysis of behavior revealed what he termed the four laws of connectionism: the law of effect, the law of readiness, the law of identical elements, and the law of exercise. The law of effect is also known as the principle of reinforcement, and shows that when satisfying events follow behaviors, the behavior is likely to be repeated. For readers, this might be receiving a sticker every time you finish a book. The law of readiness states that learning is enhanced when easier tasks precede those that are related to be more difficult. For a reader, this might mean describing setting before identifying theme. The law of identical elements states that the more elements of one situation are identical to elements in a second situation, the greater the transfer of knowledge, making learning easier in the second situation. For a reader, this could involve the use of a graphic organizer to outline a story. If the same graphic organizer is used with a new story, the student will have an easier time using it. The implications here are that if we create transferable cultures and experiences, students will develop as learners. Think about concepts like waiting in line. We wait, but we know that by waiting, we will eventually reap the reward. Therefore, next time we know how to wait without frustration. The final law, the law of exercise, states that the more stimulus-response connections are practiced, the stronger the bonds between them become. For a reader, think about the use of reading groups. If reading groups become a community where students repeat behaviors and are rewarded for those outcomes, they practice being in a reading group, and in theory, become more productive within that group as time passes. Skinner's operant conditioning theory extends behaviorism by not only offering a reward, but also a punishment. Think of this like receiving a sticker for finishing your reading and having recess taken away if you fail to complete your work. According to David Pearson and Gina Cervetti, there are three factors that have influenced reading comprehension: reader, text, and context. Throughout history, each has had their time center stage. During the behaviorism period, the text ruled the day. This model represents a text-centric time period in reading comprehension theory and research. Reading comprehension occurs at the point where all three overlap, but during this time, the text is what dominated. Here, the belief is that meaning is found largely within the text itself. The next umbrella are the constructivism and reading theories: inquiry learning, schema theory, transactional reader-response theory, psycholinguistic theory, whole language, and metacognition. Constructivism is a theory of learning that emphasizes the active construction of knowledge by individuals. Learning will occur when new knowledge is linked, integrated, or folded into existing knowledge. For readers, the emphasis here will be on the importance of having a solid foundation of background knowledge. John Dewey was one of the first American constructivists. His theory was based on the unfoldment theory mentioned earlier, but Dewey emphasized the growth of the individual, the importance of the environment, and the role of the teacher in student learning. He also emphasized the importance of problems-based learning and social collaboration. His inquiry learning theory states that students should work together to formulate hypotheses, collect data, test hypotheses, draw conclusions, and reflect on the original problem and the thinking processes needed to solve it. For readers, this means that comprehension involves solving problems and that students should engage in socially collaborative processes to solve such problems. Modern researchers like Harvey Daniels and Jeffrey Wilhelm have developed these ideas through literature circles and project-based or inquiry-based learning. John Nash talks about design thinking, which was an instructional practice adopted at the STEAM Academy. Schema theory is another constructivist theory, which was first conceived by Bartlett in 1932. Anderson and Pearson in 1984 extend this work where they define schema as knowledge and the way it is organized in the mind. This includes the processes through which existing knowledge structures are modified to incorporate new information, and the ways in which schemata change across periods of time. For readers, the emphasis here is on background knowledge and the process of making connections between what we know and what we are trying to learn. Rosenblatt's transactional reader response theory argued that every reading experience is unique to every reader and emphasized the importance of reader purpose when engaging in a reading event. Rosenblatt discusses two types of reading, efferent and aesthetic. Efferent reading is when the reader's purpose is to read for information, and the main focus is on the residue after the reading event. The reading disengages from an emotional response to solve the problem or gain information. This is from the Latin effere, meaning to come away. In contrast, aesthetic reading, the focus is about what occurs during the reading event. The reader's attention is centered directly on what he's living through during his relationship with that particular text. This is a sensory experience that involves visualization and a deeply emotional response to the text. Both types of reading require the reader to be clear and intentional about his purpose for carrying out the reading event and engaging with the text. For readers, the emphasis is on understanding that different reading purposes will yield different reading experiences. Rosenblatt argues that both types of reading are important. Currently, an increased emphasis is placed on efferent reading in public schools, as the Common Core state standards require increased amounts of reading for information to promote college and career readiness. The psycholinguistic theory is another constructivist theory. At its core is the assumption that reading is primarily a language process. The idea here is that readers rely on language as a cueing system to recognize letters and words and then stimulate comprehension. This theory is most useful when it comes to teaching young children how to read and is less applicable to strategies that will help adolescent readers. It should be noted that syntactic cues, semantic cues, and graphophonic cues make up the codes that readers use to create meaning. You will have heard of phonics instruction and decoding words, which comes out of psycholinguistic theory. This also prompted a response in terms of whole language, whereby themes are used to connect content areas and literary experiences instead of the focus on word parts and sounds and letters. If we were instructing elementary students, then the phonics versus whole language debate would be more relevant. For us, here the emphasis would be on determining if a student was using miscues, and that was affecting comprehension somehow. For example, if a student does not use punctuation correctly to denote the end of a sentence, eventually meaning can get muddled. Metacognition is the process of thinking about one's own thinking. According to Presley, proficient readers employ a number of metacognitive strategies during reading that assist with comprehension. For readers, it is important to receive explicit instruction in metacognitive strategies. This might include modeling think-aloud strategies, where we turn up the volume of what's going on silently in our mind as we read, to help with meaning making. We might ask questions, point our confusion, or rephrase something that is confusing. We simply might continually ask, does this make sense? Jeffrey Wilhelm conducted research on the value of using think aloud strategies to help students understand text. According to Pearson and Cervetti, the constructivist theories represent a time when reading comprehension was reader-centric. In this case, meaning is largely found within the reader him or herself. The emphasis is on the reader, and even though comprehension still occurs where the overlap is, the majority of what is relevant to create meaning comes from the experiences of the reader. Background knowledge and experiences are important, as are the socially collaborative discussions that create meaning in a community. Here, purpose and intentionality for completing a reading task are also important factors in creating meaning. According to Willis, despite shifts from the text as the focus to the reader as the focus, issues of diversity, race, and culture still did not play a role in the teaching or testing of reading comprehension. In fact, she argues that dominant cultural values and beliefs continue to be reinforced. Theories of literacy development is the next umbrella. As constructivism and behaviorism were taking off, developmental theorists were trying to explain literacy growth from a longitudinal perspective. Developmental perspectives attempt to explain the growth of specific behaviors and abilities across time. The following are the developmental theories of literacy: theory of cognitive development, maturation theory, theory of literary development, stage models, emergent literacy theories, and family literacy theory. The theory of cognitive development, developed by Piaget, is significant for literacy educators because it provides a general understanding of the ways in which children at different levels of maturity are likely to think, and of the relationship between cognitive and literacy development. Maturation theory supported the postponement of teaching reading until age 6 and 6 months. Although this theory has long been discredited, there are still those that feel that children need to possess a certain level of maturity before they are able to begin formal reading instruction. This does not really apply when dealing with adolescents. In the theory of literacy development, learning is seen as a natural developmental occurrence. In this theory, parents model reading behaviors and children emulate them. Once again, this reading applies best to young readers, but there is some discussion about whether or not students were provided with strong models from parents when they were young and what effect this has on them as they mature. Holdaway, from 1979, called for children to be exposed to literature-rich environments at both home and school. He is a strong advocate of promoting peer interaction among students. His most significant recommended instructional strategies are the use of big books and shared reading techniques. According to Morrow in 2012, much of Holdaway's theory and practices are consistent with emergent literacy theory. In stage models of reading, readers go through a visual stage of word recognition, an alphabetic stage of word recognition, and an orthographic stage of word recognition. While stage models are helpful for understanding children's early development, they tend to focus on the area of word recognition. Emergent literacy theorists believe that children's development in the areas of listening, speaking, reading, and writing are all interrelated. Finally, family literacy theory refers to the study of the relationship between families and the development of literacy. Once again, these theories are most relevant for young readers and not as much for adolescents. Social learning perspectives is the next umbrella on our theoretical journey. These perspectives emphasize the importance of social influences and social interaction on literacy learning. We will look at the following theories: sociolinguistic theory, sociocultural theory, social constructivism, social learning theory, critical literacy theory, and third space theory. Sociolinguistic theory emphasizes the role of an individual's language in learning acquisition and reading ability. According to this theory, varying patterns of social and language interactions subsequently lead to differences in individual reading skills. Sociocultural theory emphasizes the role of social, cultural, and historical factors in the human experience. Both sociocultural and sociolinguistic theories emphasize the social aspect of learning, but sociolinguistic theory focuses more on the language aspects of these interactions, while sociocultural theory focuses more on the broader concept of culture, which includes, but is not limited to, language. Social constructivism is based on the belief that children's growth is primarily a result of their social interaction with others. A key concept in Vygotsky's social constructivism theory is the zone of proximal development, which refers to the ideal level of task difficulty required to optimize learning. Scaffolding is another prominent Vygotskyan idea and refers to the assistance that teachers and more competent peers provide to help children learn new things. This is relevant to us because these ideas have strongly affected how teachers plan their instruction. The zone of actual development would be the tasks that students can complete independently. The zone of proximal development is the realm where students will need some assistance to complete tasks. It is also possible to give students tasks that are too hard, and that's why they are unable to complete them. Bandura developed the social learning theory, which is now referred to as the social cognitive theory. Bandura's theory argues that people learn more from observing others than they do from the consequences of experiencing things themselves. From this theory, education has adopted the instructional practice of modeling. This is where teachers will demonstrate a skill and then allow students to apply it once they have watched an expert model. Critical literacy theory challenges the traditional belief that education is a politically neutral process designed to promote individual development. Instead, the theory argues that teaching and the curriculum are political practices inasmuch as they produce knowledge for the purposes of social regulation. Freire is a well-known critical literacy theorist, and he coined the saying, "Question the word and the world." This is relevant when teaching reading because it is important to teach students to question text, question motives of the author, question the context, and understand that the construction of text and the interpretation of text are often political acts. The final theory under this umbrella is the third space theory. According to third space theory, the concept of space can be viewed as both a physical concept and a mental construct. The first space contains an individual's knowledge and discourses that are most personal, his or her home, family, and peer influences. The second space contains the more removed influences in an individual's life, such as school, work, church, and other environments that the individual frequents. The third space is an invisible internal environment in which identities and other forms of knowledge are created. The third space results from the intersections of the influences from the first two spaces. For reading teachers of adolescence, it is important to realize that what is happening to a student in one space can influence the other two spaces and ultimately affect productivity. For example, if a student is having a fight with a parent, or there is a death in the family, this could affect their ability to focus and read effectively. These theories represent a shift towards intertextual views of reading comprehension, in that readers understand each next text in relation to all previous texts that they, and the culture in which they construct meaning, have experienced. Here, the shift focuses on the cultural and social context, more than the reader or the text itself. So here we see context-centric models of reading comprehension for the 1980s to the 1990s. Meaning is created within a particular context. Our final umbrella is cognitive processing perspectives. In 1950, there was a shift from studying observable behaviors to learning how to study unobservable cognitive behaviors related to reading. There are several theories under this umbrella: information processing theories, automatic information processing model, interactive compensatory model, phonological core variable difference model, parallel distributed processing model, dual root cascaded model, double deficient hypothesis, and neuroscience. According to Slavin, information processing theories describe the processing, storage, and retrieval of knowledge from the mind. Atkinson and Shiffrin's model suggests that information moves through different stages or storage systems as it is processed, reflected upon, learned, saved, and retrieved. Their stages include the sensory register, the working memory, the articulatory loop, and long-term memory. Gao also proposed that information processing theory that became known as the bottom-up theory because these models depicted cognitive processing of information as proceeding from lower to higher level stages. Gao refers to the reading process as a series of discrete stages, which he refers to as the scanner, the character register, the decoder, the codebook, the librarian, the lexicon, the primary memory, and the TBWSGWTAU, the place where sentences go when they are understood. Gao's work was revised and renamed the Simple View in 1986 and emphasized two processes for comprehension to occur: decoding and language comprehension. This is probably something that you're a little more familiar with, as it involves sounding out words and then processing those words into meaning. Automatic information processing model is similar to Gao's model in that it is linear and bottom-up in nature. The distinctive characteristic of LaBerge and Samuel's model is its heavy emphasis on the importance of internal attention during the reading process. Their model suggests that we use cognitive energy to decode, and if too much cognitive energy is used for decoding, there's not enough left over for understanding the words and sentences. Not having enough cognitive energy for comprehension will lead to reading failure. Rumelhart rejected bottom-up cognitive models of reading because they did not conceptually allow for higher-level thinking, such as comprehending the meaning of a sentence, to influence lower-level thinking, such as word identification. In Rumelhart's interactive model, a variety of processors handle information simultaneously rather than in a linear way. The simultaneous processing of syntactic information, word order within sentences, and semantic information, which is message construction, and orthographic information, which is visual input, and lexical information, vocabulary meaning, allows for higher level and lower level processes to simultaneously interact on the text. This is considered interactive rather than bottom-up because it depicts multiple processors converging on text simultaneously rather than in a linear sequence. Stanovich extended Rumelhart's model by adding an element of compensation. Stanovich argues that if one's processor is not working well or has insufficient data, the other processors compensate for it. His model was known as the interactive compensatory model from 1980. He later developed the phonological core variable difference model in 1988, where he argues that the primary difference between normal and dyslexic individuals is determined by deficits in phonological realm or of cognitive functioning. The phonological capabilities refer to the ability to hear and manipulate sounds within words. According to the parallel distributed processing model by Rumelhart and McClelland in 1986, successful reading is dependent upon the reader's ability in 4 areas: automatic letter recognition, accurate phonemic processing, strong vocabulary knowledge, and the ability to construct meaningful messages during reading. In contrast to the parallel distributed processing model, the dual route cascaded model by Coulthart et al. Has 2 routes for processing text input. One path for handling words that are already known to the reader, and another for handling unknown words and non-words. The lexical route identifies familiar words and processes them as a whole. The non-lexical or sublexical route is based on a letter-to-sound rule procedure. The double deficit hypothesis by Wolf and Bowers in 1999 is a theory used to explain the causation of reading disabilities. According to their hypothesis, reading disabled children fall into one of 3 categories: children for whom phonological deficits are the core of their reading disability, children for whom naming speed deficits are the core of their reading disability, and children for whom both phonological and naming speed deficits are problematic. Those children falling into the last category are those with a double deficit. The last theoretical lens described here is neuroscience, which examines patterns of brain functioning through the use of brain imaging technology. This is not relevant for our course, but it's notable that there is research trying to understand comprehension from brain scans. Let's move now to a modern era of balance. which are the construction integration models. In essence, some of the approaches that we've already discussed are combined and put into practice so that what we do in practice is based on theory. CI seems to Pearson and Cervetti to be more balanced in terms of the reader, text, but places less of an emphasis on context. According to Kinch, readers should be viewed as actively seeking to create coherent mental representations of text. As they create coherence, readers traverse three elements of text representation. 1, surface form. 2, a text base. And 3, a situation model. The surface form captures the linguistic structure of the text. In the text-based phase, textual information activates a reader's background knowledge in an associative and relatively uncontrolled, almost automatic way. As the surface form and the text-based knowledge are integrated, the reader has a situation. Being able to discern important inferences from unnecessary ones in the situation that allows for comprehension to occur. You will notice that this draws on schema theory and other processing theories that were discussed earlier. This theory does suggest that although processes are automatic, a reader can exert a strategic effort to address a comprehension breakdown. Construction integration models have been adopted in practice, so many of our students will have been taught using the RAND model, where the reader is doing the comprehending, the text is being comprehended, and the activity is what the reader is doing to demonstrate comprehension. Here, the sociocultural context can influence the text, the reader, or the activity. According to Pearson and others, the context in the RAND model extends to include physical locations such as home, school, or work, disciplines such as science, literature, or social studies, and the purpose for reading, such as reading to learn, to be entertained, for insight, for gist, or for deep detail. This model does not take into account context, which can influence the reader or be influenced by the reader, which is important for our purposes of reading instruction in the Reading App class. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, framework is another CI model. This framework suggests 3 cognitive elements that should be assessed. 1, the ability to locate and recall, which is text-based. 2, the ability to integrate and interpret, which is both text-based and non-text-based. And 3, the ability to critique and evaluate, which is more critical than directly text-based. In a sense, the NAEP framework embodies much of the history of reading comprehension over the past half-century or so. The Common Core State Standards is the current curriculum document that drives most state instruction. The College and Career Readiness Cluster Standards focus on these larger concepts: key ideas and details, craft and structure, and integration of knowledge and ideas. Pearson and Cervetti find the implementation of the Common Core State Standards to be problematic in many ways because there has been a misinterpretation of the standards in the development of lessons and published materials that often undermine the standards themselves. The discouraging developments in the implementation of the Common Core State Standards represent what Pearson calls an intellectual betrayal of the commitment to the standards that the standards make to theory and research about the comprehension process. Namely, the balance among tasks that promote the development of 3 related capacities: constructing a solid text base, building a rich situation model that permits integration with knowledge, and the building of new knowledge, and using what you know to engage in a range of critical thinking and application tasks around text. Pearson advocates for the 4 resources model by Luke and Freebody from 1990, which asserts that readers assume 4 very different roles or stances as they read: the code breaker, meaning maker, text user, and text critic, and that each role emphasizes a particular resource: the reader, the text, the task environment, or the sociocultural context. In enacting these 4 roles, according to Freebody in 1999, readers break the code of written texts by recognizing and using fundamental features and architecture, including alphabet, sounds in words, spelling, and structural conventions and patterns. They participate in understanding and composing meaningful written, visual, and spoken texts, taking into account each text's interior meaning systems in relation to the reader's available knowledge and experience of other cultural discourses, texts, and meaning systems. They use texts functionally by traversing and negotiating the labor and social relations around them. That is, by knowing about and acting on the different cultural and social functions that various texts perform inside and outside school, and understanding that these functions shape the text structure, tone, degree of formality, and sequence of components. And finally, critically analyze and transform texts by acting on knowledge that texts are not ideologically neutral, that they represent particular points of view while silencing others, and influence people's ideas. And that text designs and discourses can be critiqued and redesigned in novel and hybrid ways. We tried to implement instructional strategies that resemble practices from a strong theoretical framework. Other videos in this series will take you through our modules and suggested instructional practices. This video focused on an historical overview of theories and models of reading comprehension so that you will have a foundational knowledge that will hopefully help you understand the rationale behind our practices and course design.